Thanks very much, and good afternoon. I've got the graveyard slot after lunch. Hopefully this will keep you interesting and keep you awake. My role is to chat to you about the recycler's view of recycling plastics. I'm MD of Biffa Polymers, and we're Britain's largest recycler of plastics, of rigid plastics. Quite a busy slide, I'm afraid, but it outlines our journey. The real message is here is massive investment. The business is 3 times bigger than it was 4 years ago, processing 165,000 tonnes of rigid polymer every year. And we've invested about £70 million in the last 3 years to grow this business and expand, focusing on food-grade plastics. We do 3 things. We recycle PET, fizzy pop bottles, these sorts of things. Our heritage, though, is in HDPE, and I'll talk about the work we've done with the dairy industry with packaging milk. We do a lot of non-food packaging as well. Essentially, when stuff doesn't make it through the plant in food grade, it gets downcycled into non-food, goes into things like plastic pipes, railway sleepers, and that's where plastic that is recycled, that's not food grade, ends up at the end of its life. So the dairy industry, this drove our initial growth. We worked in partnership with the dairy industry and designed a standard pack. So lots of different brands there. But what will strike you about those milk bottles, we see them every day, but they actually pretty much all look the same. And that isn't an accident. That's a partnership piece of work called the Dairy Roadmap that we did with the industry to design a package that's easily recyclable. And it's got all the right attributes. It's standardized, it's a clear polymer, it's got a pack, a label that's easily removable in our process. And when we receive this into the plant, it's very easy to sort. But it actually isn't the end of the journey. There's something about those milk bottles that you may have seen change recently. This one here, clear plastic top. Have you noticed this on the semi-skim milk? All of those coloured tops don't make it into food grade recycling. They're downcycled because it needs to be clear to go back into the bottle. If you recycle plastic that's coloured, the whole bottle will end up as grey. So the top was a problem. We had to sort it out. It's a loss to food grade. It's recycled, but it will end up in a plastic pipe buried under the ground or in a railway sleeper. But this work that we've done with the major packaging companies to change to this clear top means that 100% of this bottle is recycled. And it's those tiny improvements, we're working with brands and with packaging manufacturers, that are driving up recycling rates. Another example of the sort of change that has been made is in PET. This is work that Suntory have led with the Ribena bottle. In fact, the Ribena and Lucozade bottles, I need to check it. Is anybody from Suntory in the room? Because I would be interested in their views, but this was a bit of a nemesis for us. This bottle had a big plastic sleeve on it. This isn't a Ribena bottle. This was picked off the line of our plant yesterday. It's got a big plastic sleeve on it, incredibly difficult to remove. That plastic sleeve was PVC originally. So PVC chemically, when you put it through the wash process, breaks down into a chemical called benzene. In terms of the Food Standards Agency, you can't have that in the polymer when you recycle it. So we actually had to sort out and throw away all of the Lucozade and Ribena bottles. And what this brand have done is completely redesigned the bottle. The label has been made much smaller. It's shrink wrapped. It's really easy to remove. No PVC anywhere near it. It's an LDPE shrink wrap, and it's a bottle there that we welcome into our plant, and 100% of that is recycled. The cap is also recycled. It's not made out of the same material, but will end up in a non-food grade application. The other nemesis we had was fruit shoots. This isn't a fruit shoot, but anything that's coloured is not going to get recycled into food grade. And in fact, economically in the UK, there's absolutely no sense in recycling this. This ends up in energy from waste, almost certainly, because it's coloured. Fruit shoots and the work done by Britvic recently, that is, again, a perfect pack. It used to be a purple PET, not recyclable. It's now got a natural PET, shrink wrap sleeve, a lid and cap that comes off really easily, and 100% of that will be recycled. And these are the sort of things that, working with brands, we've been able to drive up recycling rates. Today's about net zero and about carbon, so a few quick words on carbon. And a lot of conversations at the moment about mechanical recycling versus chemical recycling. I'm actually, a long time ago, I spent a lot of time in the chemical industry. I know a bit about making plastics. One of the reasons that plastics are so good for packaging things is that chemically they're incredibly stable. It's very difficult to take a plastic back into a thing called a polymer back into the monomers, the building blocks that make it. It doesn't want to do that. And because of that, the energy required to mechanically recycle something is much lower than chemical recycling. So in terms of a hierarchy, if you can mechanically recycle it, that's the way you should go. Very few people in the world are doing chemical recycling at the moment. That is the realms of universities and startups and venture capital, but it's coming. Essentially, if it doesn't go here, it's going to end up here. It's going to end up in energy recovery. Energy recovery plants don't really want plastic. It messes with their thermal balance. So what we need to do is everything that can be mechanically recycled needs to be, and the stuff that can't, some of the more difficult multi-layer stuff, non-natural stuff, and stuff that's reached the end of its life in terms of being able to be mechanically recycled, should be in future chemically recycled. And I was asked to say a few words on biodegradable. Now, this is a real challenge. Things like PLA, biopolymers, don't naturally fit with mechanical recycling because those things are best end up into composting plants, but they will not compost in your compost heap at home. And if you go back 5 or 6 years, Innocent Smoothies had a real disaster with damage to their brand by claiming that the PLA packaging was actually biodegradable. It wasn't biodegrading in people's compost waste at home. So this is really the realm of a specialist application. Things like stadium events, the London Olympics used PLA, it was all collected and it was all sent to composting. But if it ends up in mechanical recycling plants, it will mess with the stream and damage the future of the PET and HDPE that we recycle for fizzy pop and for milk bottles. In terms of increasing recycling rates, the things that really matter, legislation is driving a lot of this. Consumer behaviour. I've got 3 adult kids who don't live with me anymore. When they come home, they mess with my recycling because where they live, it's done differently. So actually very, very clear messaging saying what you should do with it and where you should put it, and standardisation across local authorities about what people do. Design for recycling, I mentioned before, the sort of superb work that's been done by the brands to make things more recyclable. That message is now getting through. Infrastructure, I mentioned that we've trebled the size of our business, 70 million quid spent in 3 years. We need lots more capacity and we need to collect more, and some very, very big challenges that we can chat about around films and flexibles, because they're really difficult. Rigids are easier. Packaging taxes, our lobbying message here is make them progressive, because at the moment there's an incentive to go no further than 30%. At 30%, you've met your obligation. Financially, there's not really an incentive to go to 50, 60, 70% recycling rates. The packaging tax regime could be easily changed to make it more progressive and financially incentivise going above 30%. And there's some clever technology that we're introducing, things like sorting using artificial intelligence. We have some challenges at the moment that we have to pick out things like car screen wash bottles off the line. We use humans for that. So we use technology for deciding whether it's HDP or PP, but then when the HDP car screen wash bottle comes down the line, we have to use humans to pull that out. Now, AI is perfect for detecting that, and that's coming and being used already in Biffa. And this is the sort of our wish list for design for recycling. So avoid coloured polymers if it's going into food grade. If you're using coloured polymer in food grade, it isn't going to be recycled back into food grade. Please avoid multi-layers. They're there for a reason, I recognise that. They're there in terms of shelf life normally, but they cannot be separated by mechanical recycling. Labels, shrink wrap them on rather than glue them on. Glue is a real problem in the recycling plant. Try and standardise things like the design of the milk bottles and things like polypropylene. There's no food grade PP in the UK at the moment. The reason for that is there's demand, but there isn't actually the infrastructure, and we need to put all of that food grade, things like butter tubs, into clear, natural. If they're in yellows and blues, they're not going to get recycled. Please don't put paper anywhere near it, and in terms of local authorities, separate paper at that point, because the fibre sticks to the plastic, and if you see the wash plants that we have to manage in Biffa, the sludge that comes out of that is one of the hardest operational things we have to deal with. And the final one is clear caps, and if possible, tether them. The only thing that's not quite right with this bottle is when the cap's removed, if this is thrown into the recycling separately from the bottle, this is very, very unlikely to make it as far as our plant because it's so small it will be lost in the collections process. If it was tethered, then there would be no way of losing it. That's me done really, just in terms of a few summary points for the future. Things to think about. DRS is coming. Embrace it, please. Don't fight it. The sustainability, if you're managing a brand, is going to be even more important. Brand presentation on packaging is critical, and that is the reason that's given often for not designing for recycle. But consumers increasingly will demand 100% recycled packaging, and brands need to think about that in terms of sustainability. Anti-plastic sentiment will continue, and using science to say why this is a great thing is not going to get us all the way, so we need to manage that. And reuse and recycle will be the rules of the game. I think that's my final message. Thanks for your time. David.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Good afternoon. I'm Dave Meehan, General Manager of BIFA's compliance schemes, which includes BIFPAC. So extended producer responsibility. Hopefully many of you have already heard of this, which would be unusual if I'd talked to you previously around the existing regulations, which was the packaging waste regulations, or the PRN system, as many of us may know it today. When I've been in BIFA 26 years, and that time has flown by, Michael, don't worry. And so effectively I was around just as the packaging waste regulations as they are today, just about came into force, and we just about started to hear a little bit of this, and it was linked to the landfill directive and obviously to encourage more recycling. But for many companies, many producers, actually often it's just been a fee that they've paid, this PRN thing that's been a sort of a burden to their business, didn't really mean too much, and their accountant or somebody in health and safety would effectively just pay the bill, sort out some numbers. But since I've been involved with the packaging compliance of BIFPAC in 2012, that's obviously the similar in BIFA as well. I think Michael was, again, the only person who probably knew what I did. I was this person in BIFA. Does what? But all of a sudden, literally since about 2018, 2019, as we started to see changes driven by the government's resources and waste strategy, which sort of underpins everything that EPR is built upon, people are ringing me. All of a sudden, people want to talk to us. What's this all about? And it's effectively a massive change, and it's almost a generational thing. This is an opportunity now for legislation, things we've been calling for, to actually help deliver some of the change. So what is extended producer responsibility? I'm only going to focus on sort of the first 4 points on this slide as I click through, because I think these are some of the things that are actually going to drive some of the changes. So the current PRN system has something called shared responsibility. So at the moment, the obligation is diluted effectively across raw material manufacturers, across packaging converters, the pack fillers, the people who are filling the product, brands and so on, and obviously the retailers who are reselling that packaging. That's going to change to something called a single point, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on who they are in a moment. The other thing then is something called a move to something called full net cost. So what this is going to be is where it's primary packaging and it's going to end up in households, producers that are obligated are going to have a responsibility to effectively fund curbside recycling at home. So that's the physical cost to provide operatives, vehicles, the fuel, overheads, all the associated costs with actually collecting recycling for that packaging you are placing on the market is going to be your responsibility to fund effectively. So that's a big shift from paying a PRN that's just a market-based mechanism that's some form of contribution to recycling. So this is going to be a big change and will focus minds for sure. As I say, I'm going to sort of skip through a couple of these because some of those are just process bits to get to the next bit. The next one is going to be around how recyclable your material is. And again, I'll touch into detail on modulated fees in a moment and what that actually will mean. But this again is going to be an additional measure that's going to focus your producer's mind to say, how recyclable is my material? What changes can I make? And if I can't make them, it's going to cost me because it's difficult to recycle. And then to underpin all this, there's going to be a requirement for mandatory labelling. Now, in a moment, I'm going to talk about some de minimis, but for labelling, there is no de minimis. This is going to be a requirement. And this is really important because if you think at the moment, again, as I said at the start, I've been in the industry 26 years. Even now I still go, can I recycle this? I'm not sure. So things need to help to support this, to make us as consumers know what we need to do. So in terms of single point compliance, as with everything in life, there's never one. There is always some extra options that come with that. But effectively, as you can see on the screen, it starts with the brand owner. So if it's clearly, you can identify who the brand is for that packaging with some form of marking. That is the people who will now pay 100% of the cost for that packaging that's placed on the market. It's, as I said, previously shared across all stakeholders. And government have deemed this effectively the people who make the decision about packaging choices and therefore are in the strongest position to make those changes, and that's why the costs are there. In other areas, effectively, if you're importing, if you're not the brand, or if you pick up that responsibility, and then similar as you move through, some products clearly out of boxes and so on don't have brands on them if it's unmarked packaging, so therefore that's where the packer filler will come into that scenario. Also, distributors of unfilled packaging. Now, this is important because if you think there's going to be lots of producers who will still be small businesses who will be effectively putting takeaway trays and so on onto the market, and the idea is that the distributors pick up the cost for that and make sure it's built into that packaging's cost, again, to try and stimulate change. And the de minimis themselves are changing. So the current regulations, you have to have a turnover of more than £2 million and handle at least 50 tonnes of packaging. So this is packaging you're adding to products to make it sellable goods. That will still be the key point in terms of cost. However, you can now see there's a sort of pink bit in the middle there, which is 1 million turnover and 25 tonnes. And what this is going to be is an additional reporting requirement. So this is going to raise awareness about the whole piece of regulation to a wider audience of potential producers, and therefore, again, raising awareness of what impact they may be having on the environment and future collection systems. So modulated fees, as I mentioned, this isn't going to come in until 2025 on the current timetable. Whether this slips, we'll see. I mean, the regulations themselves will be in place for next year in terms of EPR itself, the starting point for 2024. But modulated fees, as I say, let's see. But the key thing here, again, is going to be about your choices of packaging. If your material is monomaterials, things that Phil's been talking about, things you'd like to see, easy to recycle, your fee will be lower than if it's complex materials, more difficult to recycle. Unfortunately, within that, there's also going to be some areas around contents. So if you think of silicone sealant, you will have our bathroom changed now and again, or our kitchen. Silicone spoils the recycling process. I can see Phil nodding. So unfortunately, even if it's in a nice PP tube that we could recycle all day long, unfortunately we can't. So this has to be reflected in the modulated fees, or this is the intention of modulated fees. So it's not just about the type of material, but it's what's in there. I've already touched on labelling and obviously the importance of that and the reasons, as consumers, we really need to know. It's going to move to predominantly this binary approach. OPRL have been leading on this, and Roger may touch on this again later. But it's recycle, do not recycle, and then also they've worked quite hard to make sure for reusable packaging they've used refill, because apparently, as the public, again, if it says reusable, we might put oil in our plastic container and then send it to fill, right? Whereas if it's refillable, we know it's meant to be used to put some more juice in, or cereal, or whatever that may be. And collections consistency, this is a bit of, this already is starting to come through for Wales and Scotland, and we're waiting for a consultation response for England. But in essence, it's important for us because this will effectively set the main materials that are collected throughout the UK. So wherever we live, whether we got a commingled collection service, whether we got a commingled collection service or a segregated collection service in our businesses, we know we can put that material in our recycling bin. So as consumers, how great is that? I know I can put this in my recycling bin or not. And then for us as waste management, we'll start to see consistent materials coming through our waste streams so we can actually invest in the right places to effectively manage those materials. So it's so important that it's all joined up. So just to finish up for me, we've got some real sort of challenging timelines coming up. EPR starts next year, 2024, and then there's sort of a slight progression to 2027 for local authorities to be ready to collect various suites of material. So that is quite a timeline when you think about we've got vehicle changes and configurations. Our MRFs might have to change to handle different types of materials because there's an ambition to get films and flexibles into the collection stream. But also, what is all this regulation change going to do to producers' choices? So we'll be pre-planning for what we think we're going to see. But if you make material substitutions, for instance, and move from a plastic bottle to a fibre-based bottle that may not even be as necessarily as recyclable, then that's going to impact on the way our MRFs operate and our collection systems operate. So we're also having to try and work around how that may look in the future. And of course, the last part of this is important, is going to be consumer participation. And we're all consumers in this room, and it's really important that we all play our part and we all contribute to adding to recycling. I'm going to dog my neighbours in now. They do my nut in because they don't use their recycling bin and they never use their food compost. And my local authority actually provide that. So it's really, really important that people participate. And the last bit then is obviously, in terms of these bit of regulations, is how it'll all interact with DRS. So that's going to hand me neatly over for talk on DRS.
Thank you. Hi everyone, get my glasses on. So ironically enough, given the conference, Phil's left rubbish all over the stage. That's not a good start. Sorry, recycling opportunities. So good afternoon everyone, my name's Duncan Mackes and I'm the Partnership Director for the Deposit Return Scheme in Scotland. Most of my background has been involved in delivering large-scale, complex, public-private, quite noisy things with a high degree of political involvement, and that's ranged from local government to defence. In my last job, I used to be the Chief Exec of David McBrain Limited, which is a ferry service on the west coast of Scotland, where I would regularly get phone calls from ministers, sometimes on a Sunday morning, about particular things. So DRS is not going to be any different in that respect. Michael spoke earlier on about our role in BIFA often is to operationalise things, and that is absolutely what we're doing here. We are doing the heavy lifting of taking something which has come down through policy into regulation, and now it needs to be turned into something which is taking place on the ground. And that causes frictions and lots of interest, and things bump into things as that takes place. But that's what's taking place just now. And there's almost kind of two sides to that. One is the political and the noise, and the other one is in the background. There is a huge piece of program-based heavy lifting to get sites, vehicles, people, processes, systems, technology, and all that sort of stuff out of the traps. And I think that's probably thematic with a lot of the things that have been discussed earlier on today. I think it's fair to say then that the Scottish Government sees themselves as progressive in terms of these sorts of activities. They were the first to introduce the 5p for a plastic bag. They were the first to ban smoking in public places. A very small number of you who are as old as I am will remember the noise about seatbelts. DRS is another one of these things. Doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do because it's noisy. It is absolutely the right thing to do, and the public are right behind it. But the government in Scotland has chosen to forge ahead and do this first, and I think they deserve congratulations for doing that. A lot of that noise is that's taking place at the moment is quite political. We've got a leadership campaign taking place. Leaders are offering views, and those of you who are familiar with Scotland at the moment will kind of see that as a regular pattern of how things are done in the kind of local politics that take place there. But it won't stop it happening. There might be a few wrinkles, there might be a few bumps in the road, but the DRS scheme is coming, and for one, and I know BIFA's proud to be part of it, and it goes live in the middle of August this year. The scheme, therefore, was enabled through an Act of Parliament, and that Act of Parliament puts in place a scheme administrator, who in our world are Circularity Scotland. Circularity Scotland then effectively oversee the scheme on behalf of the industry, as many of you will know. And the scheme sets out some very clear and ambitious benefits, which I think in the context of what we've discussed already today are logical benefits and worthy of striving towards. That scheme, therefore, the scheme administrator effectively has two subcontractors, of which we are one to deliver the technology. You can imagine there's a huge integrated overarching technology and tracking system that goes with this, and the other subcontractor to deliver the logistics, and that's our responsibility. Zero Waste Scotland are the government agency that set out the clear benefits, as you can see here, and that really kind of creates the halo for the scheme. Okay, so in terms of where we are just now, producer registration closed at the end of February, so not that many days ago, and the chief exec of Circularity Scotland, David Harris, announced that he's pretty confident and optimistic by what's happened. He's saying that 95% of the market by volume has registered, which is over 660 producers, and that will cover some 30,000 separate product lines. So, you know, the scale and the volume that's already been brought into the scheme, you can see is taking place. We, in our part, to enable that to happen, have had to put in place, as I said, a very large program. There are a number of quite complex work streams that we have to put in place to enable this to happen. And that's the focus that we have taking place at the moment. And that requires us to work very closely with Circularity Scotland, who manage us through quite a kind of strict regime of tracking where we are against our objectives before we go live. As I said, the scheme puts responsibility on industry producers to register with the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, and ultimately it revolves around charging 20 pence on each scheme article. The scheme administrator, through BIFA, then collects the containers and pays a handling fee to retailers or return point operators to cover their costs. Just to set the context, globally, I think I'm right in saying that there are over 40 DRS schemes already in place, and the vast majority of those do include glass. The inclusion of glass in Scotland has been a bit controversial, but most schemes do actually include glass. And the scheme then ultimately ensures that those 20 pences are returned to customers as appropriate. So a complicated diagram, but it really just seeks to kind of show the flow, if you like, the process flow. So in essence, there are three routes for collections. Firstly, for items that go back into reverse vending machines, an automatic machine into which the container is posted, and it tracks that container, records it, and then it enables us to go and collect it. The next mechanism is manual. That's where an individual takes along their bottle or their bag of cans or whatever it is to a return point operator. That will usually be done by consumers. And then closed loop systems, that's where you have a hotel or a restaurant or a cafe or whatever that's serving containers as part of their business and then collecting those containers back in on the premises where they've been consumed. And the containers are then either collected by ourselves. In some cases, that might come via backhaul, possibly in partnership with retailers using their existing fleet. And then those containers travel through a system of bulking centres and counting centres. And then at the end of that process, the product in bales or bags of containers that have been counted are then effectively handed back to Circularity Scotland, who then hand those over to whoever they've nominated to receive those items. The scheme capture rate assumed by CSL by all of this is about 80% for year 1, and that will go up to about 90% in year 2. The total estimated number of scheme articles per annum is around 3 billion, and that's based on around 30,000 SKUs being brought back in through 20 to 30,000 return point operators. So it's quite mind-boggling stats, but these are the meat and potatoes of what you get into when you're launching one of these things on a national basis. Our collection frequencies, how often we're going to collect from RPOs, will be modelled more accurately when we actually get into the rhythm of things, but a huge amount of work has been done to model what we think it's going to look like from day one. And in addition to these sort of fixed collection routines, obviously there will have to be things for ad hoc events. So conveniently for us, we go live on the 16th of August, which is about the time that the Edinburgh Festival's taking place. So we've got an enormous ad hoc event taking place right in the middle of it. So there's going to have to be a system to cover that. So where are we now with 5 months before we go live? So we have all our sites confirmed. That's freehold or leases are all signed up for, dotted around Scotland, all the way up to Thurso on the north coast. So we are at the farthest outreaches of the empire. We have a significant amount of investment that's taken place already. So we have pre-slots for all our vehicles. We have 475 people who are going to be recruited, and we have a lot of kit that's going to be coming in from overseas, such as Denmark. So just to kind of finish off then, the one point I would make is that as part of the way this works, Biffa is putting in 80 million to set all this up. It will get that back, but it is putting that in at the front end and funding the cash for it to do that. So I think consistent with some of the other things that we've touched on today, I think it's a laudable activity that a private sector company is willing to step into this place and put that level of finance into it to make it happen. So thank you. I'll now hand on to Roger.
Thank you very much. See some deposit return going on here, can't we? Already. It wasn't my link, but so my name's Roger. I'm the Waste Strategy and Packaging Manager here at Biffa. And I'm using my dog Jay as an introduction to myself. So Jay is an annoying black Labrador who picks up all the rubbish when I'm going for a walk. But it's also a way to introduce me. I worked in packaging manufacturing for 10 to 12 years before I then worked in retail for a similar length of time, and I was often accused of turning poacher gamekeeper when I did that move. And now I suppose, now I'm in waste management, I'm the gamekeeper's gun dog, dutifully picking up all the stuff that you guys don't want and we are trying to create value from. So with that in mind, I'm going to try and get my crystal ball out for the next 10 minutes and show you what the businesses that are really winning in this space are doing when it comes to sustainable packaging. And I think there's three things I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk about the way that data's changing, the immediate actions we can take to try and help some of these challenges. And then my overarching point is that, again, the businesses that are going to win, and the way that we advise businesses is the ones that really embrace a true circular economy for packaging. Underneath Phil's rubbish for the button, there we go. Okay, so let's start with data. Now we've heard David talk about EPR, and admittedly it sounds a bit scary and a bit overwhelming, but our message is keep calm and carry on collecting that data, because I think, again, the businesses that will embrace this will be the ones that win, because out of that data will flow the highest impact for your customer, because you'll be able to see it in the data. The biggest wins, and potentially the biggest wins to mitigate the cost, because we know the cost is going up. But more importantly for us is that it will give everyone now a strategic direction of travel. So finally the rubber meets the road with EPR, and we know where we're going. To build on that, I think the businesses that will really succeed are the ones that use the power of technology and take it even further. So most of us are familiar with smart bins, and most of us are familiar with QR codes and RFID. And I think there'll be a coming together of these technologies that will really help us get even deeper into the data, allied with the digital wallet in all of our pockets. And digital DRS will happen, whether we think it should or not, it will be a thing. Now, we can do the data, we can get smarter bins, smarter labels, but as the old saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it separate your waste. At least I think that's how it goes. Because historically, what we tend to do is we either pay or penalise you for recycling properly. And I think we're going to see, as we've seen in Recycle Week and other endeavours, we're going to see trying to tell a story about recycling is a better way to go. I met and married a beautiful Jewish lady 8 years ago, and I talked to my father-in-law about an old Yiddish word, shtick. It's the story you tell to make it interesting and maybe even comedic. So I think there needs to be a lot less stick and a lot more shtick in the way that we tell that story. So that's data. So what could we do now? What are the immediate actions we can take? And I was in a customer negotiation a couple of weeks ago, and we were hard at it trying to negotiate a new contract. And he said to us, hang on a minute, guys, the best price for waste you can give me is the waste that you don't even collect. And it sounds bloody obvious, but it actually hit me like a ton of bricks, and it was a brilliant thing for him to say. And it actually sums up our philosophy at Biffa, because we don't want to collect general waste. All we want to collect is usable materials that we can turn into something else. However, we need to take a step back, as all of us as businesses, and go, what just isn't needed? The top of my wish list, I'm afraid, is single-use carrier bags, and I include so-called bags for life in that. Who on earth needs another bag to stuff under the sink? We should just get rid of these things, and there are loads of alternatives. I'd also invite anyone to look at the work that RAP have done on uncut fruit and veg, because that's another example of where, counterintuitively perhaps, you can strip out packaging and actually save waste, or have a lot less waste. So once you've done all that good work and stripped out the materials you can, we're still left with packaging. We need packaging. And there are two more things that we can do to turn trash into treasure. The first is to optimise what's coming in through the back door. And I often use this example that Heineken spent a lot of money and a lot of time developing this. Well, it's called a yoke. The plastic thing that joins the cans together is a yoke, believe it or not. And they spent a lot of time developing the cardboard yoke instead. And intuitively, what you end up with is two bits of packaging which you've separated, which, if you can be bothered to recycle, is very easily recycled and widely recycled. And I think there are lots of other examples of this that we can take on. Then what we need to do is harmonise what's leaving the building. It might be leaving with a customer, or it might be leaving with us when we collect your waste. And for us, this is about yield. It goes back to the point Phil made about making the yield of what we collect much better. And it's about challenging the brand and marketing team. Apologies to my colleagues on the right. This is about challenging those brands and marketing teams. Say, do we need to embellish that piece of packaging? Should we gild the lily? I think we get lost in showbiz a little bit when it comes to certain types of packaging. And I absolutely love this example. Can you imagine when the packaging designers went into Evian and said, we're going to take the label off your bottle and you're going to sell more water? They probably had a fit. What they've actually come up with is something even more beautiful, you could argue, than what went before, by etching in the branding into the bottle. I won't mention the coloured lid, but that's something that I think we could learn from for sure. So, as promised, I want to talk about the circular economy and why is it important? Well, I think if we're faithful to the true nature of the circular economy, we can fix the causes of these problems, not the symptoms. We won't get to waste net zero without adopting some of the principles of the circular economy. And most exciting of all, it opens up a whole load of innovation opportunities for us in new materials and new formats. I should have mentioned on the last slide the milk bottle example. is a fantastic example of where we've collaborated as an industry, and retailers have collaborated with their competitors, and I think there's tons more examples. We mentioned butter earlier. Imagine if everyone had the same type of butter packaging that then we could recycle as well as we recycle milk bottles. But I come on to this example. So this for me is even more important, and I think it speaks to, can we think about packaging in a whole new way? It's not, and this is more than just plastics. Every type of packaging, can we think of it as not as a single-use thing that we use and throw away? Can it be almost an activity? And Splosh have done a great thing here. They've looked at the product and they said, rather than take the mountain to Mohammed, the water, Mohammed has gone to the mountain, and the customers put the water in the product, and the amount of carbon that has saved, and they completely reinvented the way that cleaning products should be sold. My reusable bottle is 10 years old and still going strong. So to wrap it all up, I mean, I want to go back to the concept of a circular economy, the one that Ellen MacArthur put together, and it's called the butterfly diagram. You don't need to be able to read the words on there. But the true meaning of a circular economy is that the inputs on the top are renewable and no longer from a fossil-based material. Nothing leaks out of the bottom, so energy from waste, unfortunately, is leakage. And then you have the technical or the bio wings of the butterfly. And of course, you want to try and reuse, rent, or recycle things on the right-hand side. And if you're in the biosphere, it goes back into the biosphere if it was food waste, or even compostable packaging that is in a closed environment. And I suppose there's three things that I would say there that the circular economy means to us. It's context, carbon, and circularity. And I think this beautifully demonstrates, you know, what we can do and how we can win in this space. And I'll hand over to Charlotte in a minute to do the panel debate, but I suppose my final message is the businesses that are brave and embrace cradle to brave instead of cradle to grave are going to be the ones that succeed in this space. Thanks very much.